Welcome back to United Marxist Pact's reading on the investigation of the formation and structure of whatever form of proletarian association that can produce a revolutionary dictatorship of the proletariat, which can in turn produce the communist mode of production. We are going to be reading the 1920 Italian Socialist Party's theses presented by the Communist Abstentionist fraction. This has a three-part. It's not particularly long, but we will see if we can get through it. And the next piece that we have on our list, which is also by the same organization and year, the manifesto/platform of the party left. Let's get into it. So this was written in May 1920. Section 1, Theory. Communism is the doctrine of the social and historical preconditions for the emancipation of the proletariat. The elaboration of this doctrine began in the period of the first proletarian movement against the effects of the bourgeois system of production. It took shape in the Marxist critique of the capitalist economy, the method of historical materialism, the theory of class struggle, and the conception of the development which will take place in the historical process of the fall of the capitalist regime and the proletarian revolution. I'm going to put this in our thread on the communist mode of production. I should really make a thread for writers after Marx, because that one is actually for Marx and Engels only. Okay. 2. It's on the basis of this doctrine, which found its first and fundamental systematic expansion in the Communist Manifesto of 1848, that the Communist Party is constituted. 3. In the present historical period, the situation created by bourgeois relations of production, based on the private ownership of the means of production and exchange, on the private appropriation of the products of collected labor, and free competition in private trade of all products, becomes more and more intolerable for the proletariat. 4. To these economic relations correspond the political institutions characteristic of capitalism. The state based on democratic and parliamentary representation. In a society divided into classes, the state is an organization of the power of the class which is economically privileged. Although the bourgeoisie represents a minority within society, the democratic state represents a system of armed force organized for the purpose of preserving the capitalist relations of production. The struggle of the proletariat against the capitalist exploitation assumes a succession of forms going from the violent destruction of machines to the organizations on a craft basis to improve working conditions, to creation of factory councils, and attempts to take possession of enterprises. In all these individual actions, the proletariat moves in the direction of the decisive revolutionary struggle against the power of the bourgeois state, which prevents the present relations of productions from being broken. Okay, we're going to take that. And what's being said here is that I'm actually going to take notes this time. The working class develops its tools and organs for engaging in the class struggle. Due to the content of the state, which is the direct form of class struggle by the ruling class, the proletariat inevitably develop the means by which to directly attack the state. Ultimately, through the destruction of the state, the present relations of production become possible to break. Okay. 6. This revolutionary struggle is a conflict between the whole proletarian class and the whole bourgeois class. Its instrument is the political class party, the Communist Party, which achieves a conscious organization of the proletarian vanguard aware of the necessity of unifying its action in space by transcending the interests of particular groups, trades, or nationalities, and in time by subordinating to the final outcome of the struggle the partial gains and conquests, which do not modify the essence of the bourgeois structure. Consequently, it is only by organizing itself into a political party that the proletariat constitutes itself into a class struggling for its emancipation. And in other words, because the proletariat ain't got no party in America struggling for emancipation, we don't really have a working class. Okay. So let's take this. We're going to say the working class needs to structure itself on a political class party basis. This party A transcends the spatial interests of particular groups, trades, or nationalities, transcends the time-based interests, the time interests of partial gains and conquests, which do not fundamentally attack the bourgeois order. It is only when the proletariat organize such an internationalist and principled organization party that it can truly engage in any form of class struggle. Okay, back to the text. 7. The objective of the action of the Communist Party is the violent overthrow of bourgeois rule, the conquest of political power by the proletariat, and the organization of the latter into a ruling class. Okay. That's pretty direct. I don't think I can even summarize that. 8. Parliamentary democracy, in which citizens of every class are represented, is a form assumed by the organization of the bourgeoisie into a ruling class. The organization of the proletariat into a ruling class will instead be achieved through the dictatorship of the proletariat, that is, through a type of state in which representation, the system of workers' councils, will be decided only by members of the working class, the industrial proletariat, and the poor peasants, with the bourgeois being denied the right to vote. We're going to put this in dictatorship of the proletariat. Okay. Back to text 9. After the old bureaucratic police and military machine has been destroyed, the proletarian state will unify the armed forces of the laboring classes into an organization which will have as its task the repression of all counter-revolutionary attempts by the dispossessed class, and the execution of measures of intervention into bourgeois relations of production and property. In other words, expropriating the bourgeoisie. And that's going to go in there. Okay. 10. The process of transition from the capitalist economy to a communist one will be extremely complex, and its phases will differ according to differing degrees of economic development. The end point of this process will be the total achievement of the ownership and management of the means of production by the whole unified collectivity, together with the central and rational distribution of productive forces along the different branches of production, and finally, the central administration of the allocation of products by the collectivity. This is going to go both in here and in economies of production. Okay. 11. When capitalist economic relations have been entirely eliminated, the abolition of classes will be an accomplished fact, and the state, as political apparatus of power, will be progressively replaced by the rational collective administration of economic and social activity. And that, by the way, means during the dictatorship of the dictatorship of the proletariat eliminates all capitalist economic relations, and the socialist mode of production will be in place. Okay, 12. The process of transforming the relations of production will be accompanied by a wide range of social measures stemming from the principle that the collectivity takes charge of the physical and intellectual existence of all its members. In this way, all the birthmarks which the proletariat has inherited from the capitalist world will be progressively eliminated, and, in the words of the manifesto, in place of the old bourgeois society with its classes and class antagonisms, we shall have an association in which the free development of each is a condition for a free development of all. Okay, this will go into the dictatorship of the proletariat and economies of production. Back to text. 13. The precondition for the victory of proletarian power in the struggle for the realization of communism are to be found not so much in the rational use of skills and technical tasks, as in the fact that political responsibilities and control of the state apparatus are confided to those people who will put the general interest and the final triumph of communism before the particular and limited interests of the groups. Precisely because the Communist Party is the organization of proletarians who have achieved this class consciousness, the aim of the party will be, by its propaganda, to win elected posts for each its members within the social organization. The dictatorship of the proletariat will therefore be the dictatorship of the Communist Party. Okay. And the latter will be a party of government in a sense totally opposed to that of the old oligarchies. The communists will assume responsibilities which demand a maximum sacrifice and renunciation, and they will take upon their shoulders the heaviest burden of the revolutionary task which falls to the proletariat in the difficult labor through which a new world will come to birth. Right. This is the first part that I have found myself significantly disagreeing, because there's a distinction between class dictatorship and party dictatorship. Hold on. At Erica. But I will record this all the same. Because we are, in fact, summarizing this work. So the precondition for the victory of proletarian power. The working class must make a communist party which have members that are the most developed in terms of class consciousness. This party will engage in propaganda and seek to win position within dictatorship of the proletariat. Um, all right. Oh, sorry. Dictatorship of the Communist Party. Am I right? All right. Back to the text. Part two, criticism of other schools. Schools in this case means schools of thought about Marxism. One, the critique which communists continuously make on the basis of the fundamental methods of Marxism and the propagation of the conclusions to which it leads have as their objective the extirpation of those influences which the ideological system of other classes and other parties have over the proletariat. That means remove one, I'm sure, right? Yes, removing or destroying something completely. Okay? First of all, communism sweeps away idealist conceptions which consider the material of the world of thought as the base, and not the result of the real relations of human life and of their development. All religious and philosophical formulations of this type must be considered as the ideological baggage of classes whose supremacy, which preceded the bourgeois epoch, rested on an ecclesiastical, aristocratic, or dynastic organization receiving its authority only from pretended superhuman investiture. One symptom of the decadence of modern bourgeoisie is in the fact that those old ideologies which it had itself destroyed reappear in its midst under new forms. A communism founded on the idealist base would be an unacceptable absurdity. Okay? I don't think that we need to specifically take that in for anything. It's already been stated, in fact. Um, 3. In still more characteristic fashion, communism is a demolition of the conceptions of liberalism and bourgeois democracy by the Marxist critique. The juridical assertion of freedom of thought and political equality of citizens, and the idea that institutions founded on the rights of the majority and on the mechanism of universal electoral representation are a sufficient base for the gradual and indefinite progress of human society, are ideologies which correspond to a regime of private economy and free competition and to the interests of the capitalist class. It would be nice if it would explain why. But essentially what they're saying is, how liberals will say, it's not the system that's a problem, it's these individual bad people in it, and over time we'll work out the kinks and then it'll be fixed here, and then we just move on to the next thing, and eventually everything will be perfect and run smoothly, and you just gotta take baby steps, slow, nothing nothing too big or anything like that, to eventually you never want to go way above. God forbid. That just creates people who are angry and want to fight against you. Okay. But it doesn't really exactly say what it is that they're calling for instead. Okay. 4. One of the illusions of bourgeois democracy is the belief that the living conditions of the masses can be improved through increasing the education and training provided by ruling classes and their institutions. In fact, it is the opposite. Raise the intellectual level the great masses demands, as precondition, a better standard of material life, something which is incompatible with the bourgeois regime. Moreover, through its schools, the bourgeoisie tries to broadcast precisely the ideologies which inhibit the masses from perceiving the present institutions as a very obstacle to their emancipation. So, there's a couple things said here. Essentially, as one gets greater educated and lives in a society with more use values in it and more access and stuff like that, desires increase and ideology develops accordingly, as does the material basis. back before cell phones were invented and then became a product which could be created for consumer basis, nobody had any social need for that. However, eventually it became socially necessary as society restructured itself to support that. But that restructuring of society to support that in turn meant that we have more needs than we did in the past, which the capitalist society must fulfill. Capitalism is in contradiction with education. It's in contradiction with development and progress. And therefore, essentially, they have to go in and clip the wings of education. It has to be education for certain purposes. Our education system is to produce factory workers in many senses. This is a well accepted fact of the matter. Everybody comes in at the bell. They have to raise their hand to go to the bathroom. They can't leave when they want. Um, they have to raise their hand to speak and get accepted in front of the teacher. They have to present their stuff in particular ways. They are produced like on a factory line, grades 1 through 12. You get a grade for quality and so on and so forth. It's a production. It's a production thing. And the way that we are educated influences, of course, the way we think about the world and what we expect out of it. So the bourgeois relations, the bourgeois structure, can't have a democratic education. It can't have one in which teaches, you know, demands for high standards of material life or anything along those lines. The master will never give the servant the tools to tear down the house. Anyway, back to the text. 5. Another fundamental tenet of bourgeois democracy lies in the principle of nationality. The formation of states on a national basis corresponds to the class necessities of the bourgeoisie at the moment when it establishes its own power, and that can thus avail itself of national and patriarchal ideologies, which correspond to certain interests common in the initial period of capitalism to people of the same race, language, and customs, and use them to delay and mitigate the conflict between the capitalist state and the proletarian masses. National irredentisms are thus born of essentially bourgeois interests. The bourgeoisie itself does not hesitate to trample on the principle of nationality as soon as the development of capitalism uh, drives it to the often violent conquest of foreign markets and of the resulting conflict among the great states over the latter. Communism transcends the principle of nationality in that it demonstrates an identical predicament in which a mass of disinherited workers find themselves with respect to employers, where whatever may be the nationality of either the former or the latter. It proclaims the International Association to be a type of political organization which the proletariat will create when it, in turn, comes to power. Okay. Uh, sorry. In the perspective of the communist critique, therefore, the recent world war was brought about by capitalist imperialism. This critique demolishes those various interpretations which take up the viewpoint of one or another bourgeois state and try to present the war as a vindication of the national rights of certain peoples, or as a struggle of democratically more advanced states against organized on pre-bourgeois forms, or finally as a supposed necessity of self-defense against enemy aggression. 6. Communism is likewise opposed to the conceptions of bourgeois pacifism and to Wilsonian illusions on the possibility of a world association of states. That would be Woodrow Wilson, by the way, League of Nations, liberal extraordinaire. based on disarmament and arbitration, and having its precondition the utopia of a subdivision of state units by nationality. For communists, war will become impossible and national questions will be solved only when the capitalist regime has been replaced by the International Communist Republic. 7. In the third area, communism presents itself as the transcendence of the systems of utopian socialism, which seek to eliminate the faults of social organization by instituting complete plans for a new organization of society, whose possibility of realization was not put in relation to the real development of history. 8. The proletariat's elaboration of its own interpretation of society and history to guide its action against the social relations of the capitalist world continuously gives rise to a multitude of schools or currents, influenced to a greater or lesser degree by the very immaturity and the conditions of struggle and of the various bourgeois prejudices. From all this arise the errors and setbacks in proletarian action. But it is due to this material experience that the communist movement succeeds in defining with ever greater clarity the central features of its doctrine and its tactics, differentiating itself clearly from all the other currents active within the proletariat itself and openly combating them. Okay. This is actually useful. And it's useful because it says through material experience, Communist Party must define with greater clarity its doctrine and tactics. Therefore, Communist Party, being reliant only on materialist analysis, is truly an adaptive one. Okay. 9. The formation of producers' cooperatives, in which the capital belongs to workers who work for them, cannot be a path towards the suppression of the capitalist system. This is because the acquisition of raw materials and the distribution of products are effected according to the laws of private economy and consequently credit, and therefore private capital ultimately exercises control over the collective capital of the cooperative itself. 10. Communists cannot consider economic trade or craft organizations to be sufficient for the struggle of the proletarian revolution or as a basic organs of the communist economy. The organizations of the class or trade union serves to neutralize competition between workers of the same trade and prevents wages from falling to the lowest level. However, it cannot lead to the elimination of capitalist profit, still less the unification of the workers of all trades against the privilege of bourgeois power. Further, the simple transfer of the ownership of the enterprise from the private employer to the workers' union could not achieve the basic economic features of communism, for the latter necessitates a transfer of ownership to the whole proletarian collectivity, since this is the only way to eliminate the characteristics of the private economy in the appropriation and distribution of products. Communists consider the union as the site of an initial proletarian experience which permits the workers to go further towards the concept and the practice of political struggle, which has its organ the class party. We'll just take this bit here. But I might go in to communist production. And we're going to take this. And we're going to take this. Okay. 11. In general, it is an error to believe that the revolution is a question of forms of organizations which proletarians groups into according to their position and interests within the framework of the capitalist system of production. It is not a modification of the structure of economic organizations, then, which can provide the proletariat with an effective instrument for its emancipation. Factory unions and factory councils emerge as organs for the defense of the interests of the proletarians of different enterprises, at the point when it begins to appear possible that capitalist despotism in the management of the enterprises could be limited. But obtaining the right of these organizations to supervise, to monitor, production to a more or less large degree is not incompatible with the capitalist system, and could even be used as a means to preserve its domination. Even the transfer of factory management to factory council would not mean, in any more case than of the unions, the advent of the communist system. According to the true communist conception, workers' supervision of production will not be achieved until after the overthrow of the bourgeois power. And it will be a supervision over the running of every enterprise exercised by the whole proletariat unified in the state of workers' councils. Communist management of production will be the direction of every branch and every productive unit by rational collective organs which will represent the interests of all workers united in the work of building communism. Oops. Another thing for the communism of production. Okay. 12. Capitalist relations of production cannot be modified by any intervention of organs of bourgeois power. This is why the transfer of private enterprises to the state or to the local government does not correspond in the slightest to the communist conception. Such a transfer is invariably accompanied by the payment of the capital value of the enterprise to the former owners, who thus fully retain their right to exploit. The enterprises themselves continue to function as private enterprises within the framework of the capitalist economy, and they often become convenient instruments in the work of class preservation and defense undertaken by the bourgeois state. So, for example, Richard Wolff or Jeremy Corbyn, one of the things that they want to do, which is the same as LaSalle, by the way, is make it so the state workers could go to the state if their business shut down due to bankruptcy or for whatever other reason. They could borrow money from the state to revive their business, to buy it from the previous owner. And then they could give their try running it. And the reasoning that they give is, hey, if that works, then eventually, the workers will just own all the businesses because worker cooperatives are a lot more stable and they tend to retain their workers and so on and so forth. It's a very old position. It has been responded to 1,000 times before by everybody. But, people still push it. Okay. Should this, yeah, no, it's fine. 13. The idea that capitalist exploitation of the proletariat can be gradually diminished and then eliminated by the legislative and reformist action of present political institutions, be elicited by the representatives of the proletarian party inside the institutions or even by mass agitation, leads only to complicity in defense of the privileges of the bourgeoisie. The latter on occasion pretend to give up a minimum of its privileges to try to appease the anger of the masses and divert their revolutionary attempts against the basis of the capitalist regime. And don't we know that? That's going to go in here. 14. The conquest of political power by the proletariat, even if such an object is considered as the final, total aim of its action, cannot be achieved by winning a majority within bourgeois elective organs. Thanks to the executive organs of the state, which are the direct agents of the bourgeoisie, the latter very easily ensures a majority within the elective organs for its delegates, for those elements which fall under its influence or into its game, because they want to individually or collectively win elective posts. Moreover, participation in such institutions requires the agreement to respect the juridical and political basis of the bourgeois constitution. This agreement is merely formal, but nevertheless, it's sufficient to free the bourgeoisie from even the slightest embarrassment of an accusation of formal illegitimacy at the point when it will logically resort to the real means of armed defense, rather than abandon power and permit the proletariat to smash its bureaucratic and military machine of domination. So, this is critiquing, I've not been doing notes, critique of engagement in bourgeois parliaments on grounds that it manufactures and presents consent by the proletariat for the bourgeois rule. It also requires oaths promising to respect and more specifically to recognize the juridical basis of the bourgeois constitution. Okay, and right here, I wanted to write something. Communists consider union as a sign. Unions cannot be the basis for revolutionary action because they are unable to engage in political struggle. Okay. And if they do, then they become a party. And then this bit, the idea that capitalist exploitation. The Communist Party must understand that any victories through reformism are ultimately the bourgeoisie being forced into it and giving temporary concessions to appease, while in reality those concessions are illusory. They would not give it up. They could not increase exploitation elsewhere. And that includes on in terms of imperialism. Okay. Back to the text. 15. To recognize the necessity of insurrectionary struggle for the seizure of power, while at the same time proposing that the proletariat exercise its power by conceding representation to the bourgeoisie in new political organizations, constituent assemblies, or combinations of these with the system of workers' councils, is an unacceptable program and is opposed to central communist demand, the dictatorship of the proletariat. The process of expropriating the bourgeoisie would be immediately compromised if the class retained a means to influence somehow the formation of the representative organs of the expropriating proletarian state. This would permit the bourgeoisie to use its influence, which it will inevitably retain because of its experience and intellectual and technical training, in order to deploy its political activity towards the reestablishment of its power in a counter-revolution. This, by the way, is a perfect encapsulation of Mao's New Democracy. The same consequences would result if the slightest democratic prejudice was allowed to survive in regard to an equality of treatment, which is supposedly to be granted to the bourgeois by the proletarian power in such matters as freedom of association, propaganda, and the press. This is going to go in Dictatorship of the Proletariat. And I also want to put this in here. And then do at Maoism, New Democracy, written about 30 years before being put in practice. Okay. 16. The program, which proposes an organ of political representation based on delegates from various trades and professions of all social classes, is not even a form and road leading to a system of workers' councils, since the latter is characterized by exclusion of the bourgeoisie from electoral rights, and its central organization is not chosen on the basis of trade but by territorial constituency. The form of representation in question is rather an inferior stage, even in comparison with present parliamentary democracy. This, by the way, is the syndicates, syndicalism. 17. Anarchism is profoundly opposed to the ideas of communism. It aims at the immediate installation of a society without a state and political system, and advocates for the economy of the future, the autonomous functioning units of production, rejecting any concept of central organization and regulation of human activities in production and distribution. Such a conception is close to that of bourgeois private economy and remains alien to the fundamental essence of communism. Moreover, the immediate elimination of the state as a machinery of political power would be the equivalent to a failure to offer resistance to the counter-revolution. Unless one presupposes that classes have been immediately abolished, that is to say, there's the so-called revolutionary expropriation simultaneously with the insurrection against bourgeois power. Not the slightest possibility of that this exists, given the complexity of the proletarian tasks and the substitution of the communist economy for the present one, and given the necessity that such a process be directed by a central organization representing the general interests of the proletariat, and subordinating to this interest all the local and particular interests which act as the principal conservative force within capitalism. Okay. Let's see. Is there anything that... No. Part 3. We're almost through. 1. The communist doctrine and economic determinism do not see communists as passive spectators of historical destiny, but on the contrary as indefatigable fighters. Struggle and action, however, would be ineffective if divorced from the lessons of doctrine and of experience seen in the light of communist critique. 2. The revolutionary work of communists is based on the organization into a party of those proletarians who unite a consciousness of communist principles with the decision to devote all their energy to the cause of the revolution. The party, organized internationally, functions on the basis of discipline towards the decisions of the majority and towards the decisions of the central organs chosen by that majority to lead the movement. Okay? Inputting that. 3. Propaganda and proselytism, in which the party accepts new members only on the basis of the most sure guarantees, are fundamental activities of the party. Although it bases the success of its actions on the propagation of its principles and final objectives, and although it struggles in the interests of the immense majority of society, the communist movement does not make the approval of the majority a precondition for its action. The criterion which determines the occasion to launch a revolutionary action is the objective evaluation of our own forces and those of our enemies, taking into consideration all the complex factors of which a numerical element is not the sole or even most important determinant. And I'm going to give an example, and it's a bad one, but at the same time, it's an entirely valid one. The 3%ers in America, right? They argue, hey, look, when the American Revolution started, it only had 3% of the population that was actively involved. And I don't think that's particularly true, but I do also know of Che and Fidel's struggle, which started with 83 men, themselves included. So, let's see. I need to summarize this real quick. Communists engage in revolutionary work only when in a party united by conscious communist principles. The party is international. The party is the party functions or is organized to be international in character. Let's just say it like that. The party functions on the basis of discipline. Towards the majority, A, and B, the decisions of the central organs chosen by that majority. Okay, and then the party engages in propaganda. It only accepts new members on the basis that they are truly that they are dedicated. The party takes action when strategic tactical means for the smashing of the bourgeois state show themselves and does not march on council. A military does not, it's a militarized party. Military organization. Okay. Back to the text. Part 4. The Communist Party develops an intense work of study and political critique intimately linked to the exigencies of action and to historical experience, and it strives to organize this work on an international basis. externally, in all circumstances, and with the means at its disposal. It works to diffuse the lessons of its own critical experience and to refute enemy schools and parties. Above all, the party conducts its activity and propaganda among the proletarian masses and works to polarize them around it, particularly at times when they are set in motion in reaction against the conditions that capitalism imposes upon them, and especially within organizations formed by proletarians to defend its immediate interests. Okay, so that's pretty easy. The Communist Party focuses, or yeah, focuses on refuting incorrect trends. It propagandizes when conditions lead the proletariat to be dissatisfied and leads them to internationalist internationalist positions against capitalism, aka for communism. It mainly does so in organizations made by the proletariat for immediate interests, e.g. trade unions, economic interests. Okay, back to text. 5. Communists therefore penetrate proletarian cooperatives, unions, factory councils, and form groups of communist workers within them. They strive to win a majority and posts of leadership so that the mass of proletarians mobilized by these associations subordinate their action to the highest political and revolutionary ends of the struggle for communism. Okay. 6. The Communist Party, on the other hand, remains outside all institutions and associations in which bourgeois and workers participate in common, or worse still, are led and sponsored by members of the bourgeoisie, societies of mutual assistance, charities, cultural schools, popular universities, Freemasons lodges, etc. It combats the action and influence of these institutions and associations and tries to divert proletarians from them. Okay, it's a row below. 7. Participation in elections to the representative organs of bourgeois democracy and participation in parliamentary activity, while always presenting a continuous danger of deviation, may be utilized for propaganda and for schooling the movement during the period in which there does not yet exist the possibility of overthrowing bourgeois rule, and in which, as a consequence, the party's task is restricted to criticism and opposition. Note, this is only when a communist party is doing it. Do not join the Democratic Party and pretend like you're moving the movement anywhere. You're not. Anyway, in the present period, which began with the end of the World War, with the first communist revolutions and the creation of the Third International, communists pose as a direct objective of the political action of the proletariat in every country the revolutionary conquest of power, to which end all the energy and all the preparatory work of the party must be devoted. In this period, it is inadmissible to participate in these organs, which function as a powerful defensive instrument of the bourgeoisie, and which are designed to operate even within the ranks of the proletariat. It is precisely in opposition to these organs, their structure as to their function, that communists call for the system of workers' councils and the dictatorship of the proletariat. So, when conditions develop, right, when you got a communist party and when you're engaging in direct class conflict, there's no point in engaging in bourgeois parliaments. And more specifically, to be frank, at that point, the bourgeoisie is going to make your party illegal anyway. So you're just going to transition over to legal struggle anyway. So anyway, because of the great importance which electoral activity assumes in practice, it is not possible to reconcile this activity with the assertion that is not the means of achieving the principal objective of the party's action, which is the conquest of power. It is also not possible to prevent it from absorbing all the activity of the movement and from diverting it from revolutionary preparation. Yeah. Okay. I don't think that this needs to be added, actually. 8. The electoral conquest of local governmental bodies entails the same inconveniences as parliamentarism, but to an even greater degree. It cannot be accepted as a means of action against bourgeois power for two reasons. 1. These local bodies have no real power, but are subjected to the state machine. And 2. Although the assertion of the principle of local autonomy can cause some embarrassment for the ruling bourgeoisie, such a method would have the result of providing it with a base of operations in its struggle against the establishment of proletarian power, as contrary to the economy's principle of centralized action. 9. In the revolutionary period, all the efforts of the communists concentrate on enabling the action of the masses to attain maximum of intensity and efficiency. Communists combined propaganda and revolutionary preparation with the organization of large and frequent proletarian demonstrations above all in the major centers, and strive to use economic movements in order to organize demonstrations of a political character in which the proletariat reaffirms and strengthens its will to overthrow the bourgeois power. Okay, that's a good bit. It's a row below. 10. The Communist Party carries its propaganda into the ranks of the bourgeois army. Communist anti-militarism is not based on sterile humanitarianism. Its aim instead is to convince proletarians that the bourgeoisie arms them to defend its own interests and to use their force against the cause of the proletariat. Below. 11. The Communist Party trains itself to act as the general staff of the proletariat in the Revolutionary War. For this reason, it prepares and organizes its own network of intelligence and communication. Above all, it supports and organizes the arming of the proletariat. 12. The Communist Party concludes no agreements or alliances with other political movements which share with it a specific immediate objective, but diverge from it in their program of further action. It must equally refuse the alliance otherwise known as the United Front, with all the working class tendencies which accept insurrectionary action against the bourgeoisie, but diverge from the Communist program in the development of subsequent action. Communists have no reason to consider the growth of forces tending to overthrow bourgeois power as a favorable condition when the forces working for the constitution of proletarian power on communist directives remain insufficient, since only a communist leadership can assure its success. 13. The Soviets or councils of workers, peasants, and soldiers constitute the organs of proletarian power and can exercise their true function only after the overthrow of bourgeois rule. Soviets are not in themselves organs of revolutionary struggle. They became revolutionary when the Communist Party wins a majority within them. More of this dictatorship of the party, as opposed to of the proletariat. Workers' councils can also arrive before the revolution in a period of acute crisis in which the state power is seriously threatened. In a revolutionary situation, it may be necessary for the party to take the initiative in forming Soviets, but this cannot be a means of precipitating such a situation. If the power of the bourgeoisie is strengthened, the survival of councils can present a serious danger to revolutionary struggle, the danger of councilation and a combination of proletarian organs within the organs of bourgeois democracy. All right. So this is where we have to essentially this is where we're going to make a break and talk about Matic at some point because, all power to the Soviets. But then they're saying, oh no, the Soviets were only revolutionary organs and whatnot because they had communists within them. Otherwise, without actual communists in them, they aren't actually revolutionary worker organs because, communists are the ones that are class conscious and whatnot. So here's a question of, does it matter who the people are within these organizations, or does it matter the structure of whatever the organization is? If you had a computer in charge of a communist party, right, with the program of the Communist Party, and it followed that program to the letter without having any conception of class itself, would it be a communist party? Food for thought. Okay, lastly, 14. What distinguishes communists is not that in every situation, in every episode of the class struggle, they call for the immediate mobilization of all proletarian forces for general insurrection. What distinguishes them is that they clearly say that the phase of insurrection is an inevitable outcome of the struggle, and that they prepare the proletariat to face it in conditions favorable to success and the further development of the revolution. Depending on the situation, which the party can better assess than the rest of the proletariat, the party can therefore find itself confronted with the necessity to act in order to hasten or delay the moment of the decisive battle. In any event, the specific task of the party is to fight against those who, desiring to hasten revolutionary action at any price, could drive the proletariat into disaster, and against the opportunists to exploit every occasion in which decisive action is undesirable, in order to block the revolutionary movement by diverting the masses of the action of masses towards other objectives. The Communist Party, on the contrary, must lead the action of the masses away always further in an effective preparation for the final and inevitable armed struggle against the defensive forces of bourgeois rule, or what Lenin would term the decisive moment. Okay. And that is our reading of the theses presented by the Communist Abstentionist fraction of the Italian Socialist Party in 1920. This is an interesting piece. There's a lot of really good stuff in it that I took for our research into the communist mode of production, the dictatorship of the proletariat, and for our investigation into workers' organization. The main part that we're going to have to reconcile with to some degree is this conception, and I always thought that this is joking, but clearly this is a specific call that they made from a transition of worker the dictatorship of the proletariat, to a dictatorship of the proletarian party, on the basis that essentially the members of the class party, the Communist Party, are the most advanced workers and whatnot, the vanguard, as they would call themselves. This goes against my instincts, but we will do more research here. It might involve reading Matic. For good or ill. On that note, thank you everybody for coming. Tomorrow we'll have another session, and I will upload these when I get the notations done. If anybody wants to get involved with that, let me know. UMP signing off.